and doing the best that we possibly can, and essentially maintaining a positive attitude. So what we're going to be talking about over the next few minutes is the idea of what is reflective leadership. Um, and when we mention the word reflective leadership, the first thing that can come to mind. Oh, sorry. As a side note, for some reason, and I'm not sure why, whenever I do little actions like a thumbs up or if I wave my hands in the air, sometimes we get some graphics next to my name. Fireworks is one, and I honestly don't even know how it happens or how it needs to stop or how to stop it, but it's always a fun little thing that happens. Um, all right, back to being serious. So, uh, when we mention the idea of reflective leadership, those two words together, really at the core of it, the idea of self-awareness floats to the surface. Tabitha, who has been on one of our courses in the past, spent a week or two with us talking about the idea of self-awareness. We're going to touch on that just a little bit today. And we'd like to send you home with some actual can-do actions, which realistically you could implement tomorrow. And so we're going to talk a bit about some conflict resolution pro tips. And Bob, and just as something that's come to my mind here, because there are just a few of us in that last 20 minutes, what we can do is we can also, if anyone has any questions generally on leadership or wants to throw out some ideas to speak about, we could definitely utilize this platform to brainstorm ideas. Yeah, absolutely. So first question, and something that we like to highlight generally within our training is the idea of everybody can bring something to the table. So we like to put out a question and then have a bit of an open discussion forum. And obviously, we're a little bit pressed for time today, but we're going to do a little of that collaborative learning. So what do we mean when we say reflective leadership? And I've already mentioned the idea of self-awareness and splitting up the two words reflective and leadership. But before we really kind of touch on the idea of reflective leadership, I'd like everybody to take 2 minutes and just think about two leaders that you have worked with at some point in your life who've had an impact on you. And as you're thinking about those two people, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about the qualities that really held an impact on you. These people can be colleagues, can be mentors, can be employers, can be teachers, whatever. So we're just going to take 2 minutes and have a think. All right, I believe that's about 2 minutes or so. So, what I'd like to do is I'd just like to open up the floor and say, would anyone like to share an impactful leader, an idea about an impactful leader that they've had in their life? Lucy, hello, by the way. It's been a while. I have not seen you in a long time.
Hi. How's everybody? Okay, this is somebody who had an impact, but in a very negative way. But I thought I would list their qualities because it's quite interesting when you do actually start doing that. So this is somebody who I found was a bit of a bully, was insecure, had low emotional intelligence, was quite egotistical, was patronizing, lack of empathy, more apathetic than anything, and was out of his depth. Somewhat misogynistic as well, but that obviously doesn't apply to all gender specific issues, but he certainly was. And overall, it was a very difficult, toxic relationship. It's a very difficult leader to work for, because I never knew how to fulfill my targets and how to make him happy. If that makes any sense.
That makes loads of sense. And I actually love how you took that in a bit of a different direction, because generally most people would take a positive spin. But a really impactful aspect of this exercise is that you can take it in that direction.
Yes.
and look at the negative aspects and qualities of leaders, right? Because from that pot, there were so many words that came out that describe, what a great leader is not. And we can take that information moving forward, correct? So, does anyone have we'll do one more. Does anyone have another leader that has impacted them? Bhavin, I'm curious to hear if you, okay. Jill, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so, yeah, just briefly, I think my English teacher at my secondary school, Mr. Powell, he stayed with me for such a long time, I think, and it just goes to show what real leadership can do. So he was about 6'7", this bloke. He was like kind of like a really sort of powerful figure, but he was just so passionate about English, and he kind of, sort of opened up a whole new world. And it was about that sort of ability to make you feel that you knew stuff and that what you were saying was of value. He was just, yeah, I guess, that kind of cliche about inspirational, but he was also, I think, a really good person. He actually taught adult literacy in the local prison at that point as well. So it was just that kind of, that sort of whole package of in at that age, I suppose, when you're a teenager. I mean, he's the one that stuck with me. I mean, I'm kind of like my 60s now, so it's just like, obviously there's been others, but he's the main person. Yeah.
What I really like about that example is I think it really highlights the idea that, as an individual, we never necessarily know when something that we say or, a position that we take is going to hold an impact on somebody. It is, I was going to say, probably some years ago that the English teacher, this was your English teacher, but, the fact that you can describe it so vividly, and even just looking at your face as you're describing this individual, it takes you back, right? And clearly that's held such an impact on you moving forward, and maybe the way that you approach leadership now.
Christian, can I just interject here?
Sure.
Hi everybody. By the way, I can't see no one because I'm sharing my screen, so apologies. I can't see any faces. But what's really interesting from what Jill said and what Lucy said is something that we share with our training that we do about leadership, is that you remember people for the way they treated you more than the job that they did. You remember people for the way that they treated you more than the job that they did. Jill, just to go through your example, you said that your English teacher was passionate, was a good person, and also did some work with the local prison. You didn't actually say he taught me Shakespeare or he told me what a subjunctive sentence is. Can you see? His feelings is what was more memorable. So thank you for sharing.
No, that's great. I'm not sure if anyone else, Bob, the PowerPoint seems to have gone black. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, that was me speaking too quickly. Go.
Perfect. Well, that was great. We got one negative and one positive, and I think that really spills into the next slide quite nicely. About 2 years ago, someone shared a diagram of leadership with me, and it was the idea that leadership starts from within. And essentially, the idea was that if we look at an organization such as a care home, ultimately the goal of the organization is to care as best as they can for the residents of that care home. However, if that organization is not necessarily in alignment, then the care can slip potentially. And then if you move further down, essentially the pyramid, if the teams within that organization are not aligned, well, then the organization is not going to be fulfilling its end goal, which is caring for the residents. And if you look at the individual team members, if they're not necessarily fulfilled or motivated or positively influenced or impacted, they're not going to bring them the best of themselves to their team, which is ultimately going to affect the organization, which is ultimately going to affect the end product and the end result. So ultimately, when we look at leadership, it starts from within and understanding ourselves and understanding our authentic personas and being true to ourselves and having the courage to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, this is what I'm about. This is who I am. This is what I believe in. And this is what I bring to the table. And backing the majority of our decisions on our own principles, values, and our morals, I guess. Being self-aware, as I mentioned, is the idea of looking at ourselves in the mirror and being able to truthfully ask ourselves some questions. Do we sometimes get things wrong? I will raise my hand and say, I absolutely do. Bhavin, do you get some things wrong every once in a while?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even this morning, right? So great leaders, as you just said, is the ability to be self-aware, self-reflect, but acknowledge that no one's perfect.
And when we just, from the last exercise, one thing that I really liked about that exercise, and it's something that we consistently do with our groups and throughout our training, is that it allows us to reflect on an idea of what we personally value within leadership and what we don't value within leadership. Lucy gave some prime examples of negative qualities, right? And it's a tool that we can use to basically be reflective on ourselves, to understand, okay, who had an impact on us and why, and what potentially do I strive to be like, and how do I want to be as a leader? How can I get myself to that level? Versus, okay, how am I as a leader? How am I not wanting to be as a leader? And how am I going to avoid being that misogynistic, bully person? And it allows us to make informed decisions and, carry ourselves in such a way that's going to draw us to that ideal version of our leader. As I mentioned earlier, leadership is not something that's learned overnight. It's a constant journey. And as long as we have kind of that North Star as to who we are and who we would like to be, we can consistently work ourselves through the successes and the failures to really kind of move ourselves forward and put one foot in front of the other, learn and get better and work towards that vision. Being self-aware also, we ask ourselves questions such as, how do I support my team to navigate through any mistakes? We have all worked in teams before, and teams make mistakes, and sometimes they need guidance, and it's setting essentially a standard and a culture, which in the next question, how do I continue to create a culture of mutual support and accountability, of picking each other up when we're down? So often when we're working in teams, we end up working with people who aren't having the best day, and how do we support them to ensure that they can bring the best of themselves out? Or how can we support them to ensure that, even if they're having a bad day or they're not necessarily bringing all of themselves to the table, how can we support them in a way that we can at least cover for them until they are better or feeling more apt and feeling more vigorous, we'll say. Being self-aware is understanding that there are going to be bumps in the road throughout our journey. Next slide, please, Robin. So one example we'd like to talk about today is the idea of blame culture. So Lucy, in the example you gave earlier, there were words in there that kind of coincide with the idea of blame culture. I'd be very curious to know, working with that individual, was there a blame culture within that organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lack of self-awareness. He was classic Dunning-Kruger. He add too much ego to recognise his own insecurities and incompetencies. But yeah, absolutely, the blame culture was rife. It was a very toxic environment to work in.
Yeah, and I mean, you basically presented this slide for me, so thank you very much.
Exactly.
Ultimately, a blame culture, it can be described in so many different ways. I won't regurgitate what's on the slide for you, but essentially what it does is it creates a toxic workplace. People are scared. People don't feel comfortable. People don't trust one another. So I'd like everybody to just take 1 minute and just reflect on how this might actually play out in their workplace. Does it play out in your workplace?
Right there. Oh, thank you.
And just think about the components that potentially could be altered. Could be. Bobbin, do you have any personal experiences with blame culture that you could share with the group?
Possibly quite a few, but just a very particular one. I said to people at the beginning, I've just come out of the education system, having been there almost 20 years, and I've been a senior leader for just over 9, including a head teacher. About 8 years ago, I once worked in a school in London with a head teacher, in a difficult school at the time for lots of reasons. So there was a new team, including myself, who just joined. The real reflection for me, and I left that job, I'll say this quite candidly, within a few months, because morally, there were certain things that I was asked to do that I was not comfortable with. So people were often singled out and blamed, but we were told to find fault because there was an agenda. And as a senior leader, I found it highly uncomfortable to catch people out. And as a result, I left. But the point, I think, that's on the slide and what Lucy said, the culture was really toxic. So although I wouldn't say that's my present place of work, which is what the question asked, it's something that I've experienced that really stays with me as a leader to this day.
Lucy.
I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but it's an interesting conversation, isn't it? I wonder whether some of it also, and Bavin, I've seen this before in schools and elsewhere, is that blame culture is all about also people not taking collective accountability and responsibility for things. So the CQC in some respects, and Jill will laugh at this because I don't often say very lovely things about the CQC, but in some respects, they have done us a favour in suggesting that we have to evidence everything and build a picture of an evidence behind us, because, and I've done lots of phrases in the last few weeks and I haven't got them all right at all, but what I have said to everyone is that, if they're having a problem with something, if a resident tells them something and then they feed it up and it doesn't get enacted, unless they've kind of evidenced that they've had a conversation and somebody didn't like their porridge, it was cold, just an example, and that they fed it back and that nothing's been done. I can't do much with that unless I've been told. And then I can say, but hang on a minute, this person we're painting a picture of these residents every day, aren't we, over the course of their life. Every single insert we do is like a brushstroke. And so if I don't have those brushstrokes, I've got holes in my picture. And so I think some of it is, it's not blame culture. It's not about me saying that, well, no, Joe Bloggs, you didn't do that because Jane told you to do X, Y, and Z. I've got a picture here that's been painted for me about somebody, and I can see that probably over the course of it, you haven't necessarily taken that seriously. And how can we make that better? How can we all work together to make that a better system or environment for that resident? Does that make any sense?
And totally, Lucy, it goes back to this second question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just about blame in its strongest sense. It's about how do we support each other to make sure we then make the next move that's the most positive one, isn't it? So working collectively, that culture that you create in homes where you support each other to navigate through those challenges, as opposed to just blaming someone per se. Is that what you were saying?
And you know what really sticks and resonates with me is in listening to both the examples, Bobbin and Lucy. Lucy, from what it sounds like, is it's the idea of empowerment and supporting. Whereas Bobbin, when you were mentioning the idea of finding fault, that just sounds almost more like a non-supportive approach
Yes.
to the process, right? Let's just find fault and point the finger. Whereas filling in the gaps and understanding why we're doing what we're doing and ensuring that, you know, all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted is the idea of, so that we can better support the end user, is more of an empowering approach. And that's what really resonates with me. When we look at the impact of blame culture, so when blame culture is at play, or maybe we should even just rename it and call it toxic work environment. We're going to see higher levels of turnover. People are going to be, our staff and our teams are going to be less able and less willing to make decisions. There's going to be less creativity throughout our team. People aren't going to be happy. People aren't happy in a blame culture or toxic work environment. Everybody's going home and just stressing themselves out and having a glass of wine or two on a Friday and just venting to other people, as opposed to coming home smiling and saying, I had a great week at work. And similar to what you said earlier, Lucy, is the idea of reduced levels of accountability and responsibility taking. Perfect. So let's talk about pro tips, things that we can do. So there are things that we can do from a leadership perspective, and then there are things that we can attempt to do for our team. So the first is ground yourself. Be clear on what you stand for. Bobbin.
This is a really important one, and as leaders, we'll all know this, but I think it's really important we just bring it to the surface, because we all need this reminder about what are the values that I absolutely stand on for the work that I do. You work in the care sector, where care, high quality care, determines every decision and action every single day. Otherwise, you would not work where you do. So, as an individual, what do I stand for? What are my values? And then your organization should also be in line with that, or the organization that I work for should be in line with that. So always reminding yourself and the people that you line manage, that you work for, is what do we stand for? What are the values that we will not compromise? So I gave you an example of a value that was compromised for me, i.e. catching someone out, being disingenuous. And for me, that meant I had to leave that job. I'm not suggesting anybody does that, but the tip here is be really deliberate about what you stand for and remind yourselves and your teams about it on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, oftentimes people can look at this and say, okay, well, I don't really know what I stand for, and I don't really know, what my inner values are. And a really great way to discover that is ask yourself the question is, why do I do what I do?
Yeah.
We've all chosen a career path, and we could have chosen many other career paths, but yet we're here. We're here in this meeting right now. Why have we chosen to be here? Why have you chosen to be where you are from Monday to Friday, and probably on weekends as well, because we all work way too much. Stay in control and reframe a stressful situation and keep your composure. And this is when I talk about this, I think of the idea of maintaining perspective. It's very easy to look at something and point out the problems, as opposed to looking at something and understanding, okay, how can we improve things and coming up with solutions, essentially maintaining more of a positive perspective on things. It's very easy to take a negative and run away with it, as opposed to look at something that might not necessarily be the way we want it to be and reframe that within our minds. And I guess that, yeah, goes on to the next one, maintain a positive outlook. And there is a difference between being generally positive and being sickly positive. We all know those people who are sickly positive. It's great to a certain extent, but when we're in a really negative, crummy mood, it can really bring us down, and we can get really aggravated by it. However, if we can always look at something and see the sunny side as opposed to the dark.
Yeah, Christian, can I just
Oh.
add to that? It's
Yeah.
this notion as leaders, we set the tone of the organization and the institution that we work in and work for. We set the tone. And of course, as humans, we are emotional beings. And therefore, an emotional being will have days where we are less so positive. But if we go to our place of work, you go into your care home in a negative mindset, that will reverberate and others will pick up on it. It's very basic psychology. So being really deliberate about a positive outlook. I know Christian just said some people are sickly positive all the time, right? Whatever that means, but being really clear that as leaders, we set the tone. And that means that other people will mimic our outlook. Christian.
Yeah. I was going to say, even along with that, is it's actually a physiological proof that there are these things called mirror neurons. And so if we're in a room speaking with somebody and they're smiling, we're apt to be smiling more than frowning, just because we pick up on their vibe and we pick up on how they are and who they are. So if we can maintain that as leaders, that's good stuff. Drill down the roots. Don't be necessarily surface with solving the problem. Get to the root cause of the problem. Ask yourself why. And once you get the answer of why, ask yourself why again.
Yeah.
Why are things the way they are? And then generally, when we start to ask ourselves one layer down, second layer down, we can generally get to the root of the problem as to why things are the way that they are, why are people being the way that they are. Also being open and having conversations with people as leaders, this is one of the key things that we do is communicate. If we can communicate properly, we can generally get to the root cause of problems. Bob.
Yeah, and it's this notion that putting a plaster on something, and you work in very fast-paced organizations in your day-to-day job. I mean, Christian and I work with different sectors, but we also work quite heavily and very recently with the care sector, and we know what it, well, I can't fully empathize, but I have an appreciation of what a care home is like on a day-to-day basis. And it sometimes can feel like in any institution where you just want to put a plaster on something and then move on. And actually what we're saying as leaders is you sometimes need to drill down a little bit more because you just don't want an error to be repeated and repeated and repeated. So again, deliberate thought to what is the cause, not just treating the symptom.
Another pro tip is to eliminate emotions. As Bhavin was saying, we are emotional beings, and sometimes emotions can get the better of us. I have had many a time coaching clients and coaching leaders where they present me with a situation, and they just are extremely emotional, red face, potentially tears coming. They get angry. Their emotions get heightened. And generally, my solution is, okay, great, write an email. Don't send it, but write an email. List everything you ever want to say about it. Call them every name under the sun that you could ever think of. Lambaste your team any way that you want. Then come back the next day, read through that email again, and pull just the facts. Take the emotion completely out of it. And if we can do that and take that approach, essentially we're going to be taking a stronger, more competent leadership approach to conflict resolution or bumps in the road. And take action. Make decisions, implement decisions, and make it known to everybody what's going on. Comes down to essentially action and communication.
And as leaders, go back to what we said at the beginning about reflective leadership and leaders that are self-aware. Often people get really frustrated with indecisive leadership. Sometimes a decision just needs to be made, knowing that other people are not going to be happy. That's fine. Christian and I talk about in the course that we do about the 80-20 model. Once you get to 80%, you go with it, because trying to get to 100% all the time, one, it's exhausting, and two, it's not actually practical. So make a decision as leaders and implement it and make it known that that's the change, or this is what we've done, even though you know that some people are not going to be happy, because you're not going to make everyone happy all the time.
Lucy.
So this is a hard one to answer, but I suppose I'm thinking about people at the beginning of their journey as a leader, or at the beginning of their journey as a registered manager. It's hard to build that emotional resilience and objectivity sometimes when you're having some of these difficult conversations. I'm 4 or 5 years in now. I feel a lot more robust than I did at the beginning, and in the beginning it was all COVID and everything, so it was a fraught time. But I have conversations now with people in a much more objective and resilient way than I did initially, and I'd come away from conversations sweaty, shaking, bit emotional. And I suppose I'm asking is how do you teach somebody that, because that's taken me time and experience, and I don't know whether it can be taught as well, but equally, how do you help somebody at the beginning of that journey?
That's a great question. You're right, it's a difficult one to answer because there is no right answer to your question. Having said that, though, my thought right off the top of my head is the idea of having someone you can talk to and having an outlet and a support system in place for yourself. Because realistically, and I'll bring it back to my experience as a practicing chiropractor, when I first started, you have all the theory in front of you and at the ready. However, putting it into practice and dealing with emotions of other people, all of a sudden, when someone has a knee problem, a back problem that's debilitating them from being able to go to work and provide for their family, well, that just takes a general knee or back issue and blows it up in a completely different facet. And you're right, experience does take time, but then having mentors and people that you can speak to about certain situations and go back to the drawing board and having people that are going to help pick you up, dust you off, and push you back in is key.
Yeah.
Support systems.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Christian's absolutely right. If you're new to a leadership course as a registered manager, having a sounding board, someone that you can share and get advice of, is crucial. And research will tell you that in any institutions, people need someone who's at their level that they can bounce ideas off. The second thing I would say is our tip number one: be really clear as a registered manager, new to post manager, what you really stand for. What are your, dare I use the phrase, red lines? Because you set the tone. Of course, you work with other leaders within your organization because it might be a multi-home institution, but be really clear about why you do what you do, because that then reverberates. So, Lucy, it's a difficult question, but a really important.
I think it's helpful. Thank you. That's really helpful.
And even just as another little note on that one is the idea of confidence. So when we talk about taking action, for someone who has 10 years of experience, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to take action and make a decision than someone who maybe has 1 year of managerial experience. One thing we like to talk about in a few of our trainings is the idea that, unfortunately, when we make a decision and take action, it's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to go right or it's going to go wrong. And if it's not necessarily the right answer and it's the wrong answer or the wrong action, well, we need to have the resilience to basically learn from that and understand that, okay, maybe this time it wasn't the right move, but now next time I'm faced with a situation very similar to this, or this exact same situation, I have more arrows in my quiver to be able to, and more knowledge to be able to make that right decision and improve my confidence in that sense. So resilience, confidence, mentorship. Yes, all of the above.
Well, Christian, for everyone who's joined, we did say 40 minutes, so we're exactly at 40 minutes. I mean, just slightly under because we started at 3 minutes past. And this is literally our penultimate slide because I've got one slide on Indago. But Christian, this is something that you really like sharing
Yeah.
with me. So go on.
So working with teams, and so when we're talking about blame culture specifically, or even just any kind of conflict, what I like the idea of is to separate your solution or your idea and my solution and my idea and bring it together as a team and say, hey, it's our solution and our idea together, empowering each other to move forward together. In doing so, creates team cohesion and ultimately trust and confidence in one another, empowering one another, and results are generally going to be far greater and far superior.
Yeah, brilliant.
Perfect.
Thanks, Christian. And everybody, thank you. We did say 40 minutes and no more, purely because I appreciate many of you will be at work and have carved a bit of time out to join us. But thanks to Lucy and Michaela, who I've been in conversation with over the last few weeks, few months, and we were asked to come along and share a bit of a snippet. And as I said right at the beginning, so apologies for those people that were there at the beginning, because I'm repeating myself here. Indago Development is a learning and development organisation. Although it's based in the United Kingdom, we do work beyond India, UAE, Canada, where Christian is. We work predominantly in the health and social care sector, so nursing homes, care homes in the UK, but actually we do work in other sectors as well. I joined relatively recently in the last few months over the summer. Christian's been with Indago for over a year, but collectively we work within the learning, development and education faculty. I will take some questions and comments, but just one slight plug, if I can. Just Indago Development, obviously our vision is fairly straightforward. We just want to transform the social fabric of the communities we engage with. And as an educationist, I'm really adamant that the power of education is really important. So at the moment, we've got 4 programs running, what we call the New Entrant program. We work with migrant workers that come to the UK, and we do work on how to make sure that they have a bridging program, so that wherever they come from, India, Sri Lanka, Africa, wherever it is, that they have the basic knowledge, understanding, skill sets. So we have the New Entrant Program 1, we have a New Entrant Training Program 2 that includes in-person training in their country of origin. So I'm going over to India in November, where we've got people that are going to come to the United Kingdom. So they get e-learning, they get webinars, and then they get, in essence, 2 weeks of in-person training of things like how to use a hoist and manual handling. And we do some work on language acquisition. And that's really got great visibility in parts of India, which is where we're working at the moment. Leaders of Today is a program that we run, which is 6 weeks webinar-based learning on leadership, and then one-to-one development, which is a 6 to 8 week coaching program, which we work with organisations and then in particular individuals. And Christian and I do the coaching for that. So that just gives you a brief snapshot of what we do, and what you've seen today has been a snapshot of quite a longer program that we run. So I hope that's been useful. I don't want to take too much time, but is there any questions, any comments, anything possibly anyone wants to share?
I was just going to say, I think one thing that I really like about these type of quick presentations, or even the programs that we offer, is we generally strive to at least have everybody be able to take away one actionable item from every day, something that they can move tomorrow and make just one small little change. When we talk about leadership, as we've said probably about 10 times already today, is leadership's a journey. And the only way that we can improve and get better is by actually implementing new ideas and new techniques and new ways of thinking. And that can be the most difficult part, is just breaking the mold of what's usual to us and how we go about our day to day, and making one small change can really have an impact and a cascading effect on how we approach leadership and how we work with our teams. Oh,
Brilliant. Well, thank you everybody for joining. My email is literally my name, bavin@indigodevelopment.co.uk. Christian's the same, so do reach out to us if there's anything. And it's great to see Tabitha, who I know had joined a previous course, so that was great to see some familiar faces. But yeah, share what we do, and we're happy to help in whatever way, shape or form. So have a good rest of the day, and have a good to see you all. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
welcome.
much.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.